Welcome to this month's edition of the Cerini Nonprofit Connection. First of all, everyone, happy Valentine's Day. Today we have Ed Probst and Tommy DiMisa of Vanguard Insurance Agency. Welcome. They specialize in helping nonprofits become employers of choice. So, Tommy, Ed, can you maybe share a little bit about how you work with nonprofit organizations?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. And first of all, I want to thank you for inviting us in to speak today. Vanguard has been in existence. It's celebrating its 20th year this year.
Wow.
So we're excited there.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And for the better part of that 20 year, we've been working with the nonprofit sector. And we primarily, our core competencies are we provide health insurance benefits, ancillary products, voluntary benefits to the nonprofit sector. But that's kind of like the core business that we produce. However, what we've also been doing is helping nonprofits learn how to use those tools to become employers of choice and help them with recruiting and attracting and retaining employees. So that's kind of how we've been working with them. The nonprofits, as you might know, have they're very tied to employee benefits because salaries might not be the highest that they are, and they're always competing against for-profits. So it's really, it's very, very strategic process in going about helping them design packages that will help them be that employer of choice.
So you talk about the whole aspect of being an employee of choice, and you talk about, designing different packages. I mean, what can a nonprofit do, or what should a nonprofit do to kind of get to that level of being that employer of choice, I'm sorry.
Yeah, so from a benefits perspective, one thing we see is that nonprofits, well, first of all, education is critical, right? So in our firm, our motto is educating employers one employee at a time. And, educating employees in an environment and a landscape today where health insurance prices and benefit costs are going through the roof is critical. So from a benefits perspective, I think it's important that they think out of the box and that they work through different strategy and not get caught up in the every year humdrum world of this is what we have to offer our employees, this is the level of benefits, and we really can't make any changes. Well, from an employer of choice perspective, it's not just insurance products or health benefits that make them an employer of choice. The typical employer of choice model is an environment that people really enjoy working for. They like showing up to work every day. It's a great work environment, or considered a great work environment to be in. Typically, those organizations have lower turnover, they have higher retention rates, and they're able to focus on the employees rather than in addition to their missions.
So how does a nonprofit kind of marry their employees to their organization so that the employees want to be there? I mean, is it a mission-driven thing? Is it a social thing? Is it a benefits thing? Is it a salary thing? I mean, what is it that gets the employees to kind of want to stay and wake up every morning and say, not say, crap, I have to go to work, but say, hey, I want to be there and I'm really motivated to be there?
Yeah, I think a lot goes into that. From a corporate culture perspective, and that's really what it is. It's becoming employee-centric, for lack of a better word, and really, really focusing on your employees. But let's define what an employer of choice is, right? So do you recognize your employees? We have clients that do a really great job of recognizing their employees. They, at their events or throughout the year, they may recognize employees on years of service or merits throughout the year. What's the work-life balance in the organization? In today's times, especially, more employees are working remotely. More employees need to spend more time with their family and want that in an employer when they're conducting their job search. So how is your work-life balance in your organization? And some days that might mean 4-day work weeks or things of that nature that bring it. Job stability is very key in this situation because you want to make sure that you're working for an organization where people have been there for a long time. That you're promoting from within, you're creating opportunities for your employees. So it's not just a benefits play, although when we talk about employee benefits, people think health insurance and that is what we do. And the thing is that you can create strategies that help reduce health insurance costs and benefit costs that will help you gear towards becoming an employer of choice and spend more money in areas that might be attractive to employees.
Ken, you know what I found? We have some clients and folks that we talk to in the sector specifically that are truly focused on the development of their people. And you talk about, is it the connection to the mission? Are they going there for a paycheck? I mean, I have one group that I'm thinking of specifically, where I spoke to the executive director recently, and one of her concerns, excuse me, was that where is that engagement with her employees? And I think, like in most organizations, I mean, you run a rather large organization, and I'm sure you're savvy enough to go and interact with your people and discuss. I think gone are the days of the personnel department, right? We're way past that. It's more about, I go to an organization, maybe I go there for, the benefits, the health insurance and the salary, but where am I being challenged? Where am I growing as an individual? And I think, in my opinion, specifically in this sector, in the nonprofit sector, it's even more relevant to engage with your people, because they are your front lines. So I have this client I'm referring to. She's very high on personal development for herself, and it takes what she learns and brings that back to her people, and those ideas and those concepts and strategies about, again, not necessarily about health insurance or paid time off, but rather bringing them up, helping them grow. It sounds cliche, and I'm not trying to sound like big corporate America, but sometimes people either are in the wrong seats on the bus, or candidly, maybe they shouldn't even be on the bus. And it's that sort of thing where it's that open dialogue, I think, that you have to have with your community, your individuals, the folks that work with you there. And a lot of the folks we talk to, specifically in the space, they don't see their employees as that employees, but partners in the organization, because you've been working in the sector long enough to know that is your front line. So the better you can understand what those people's kind of hopes and dreams and where they want to go, whether it's with you or somewhere else, I always think if you can get engaged with them, find out what their dreams are, and help promote those dreams, you have a friend now. You don't just have an employee.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think part of it is connecting them, as you said, to the mission. So that they understand what it is you're trying to accomplish. And I think it also comes down to sharing information. And I think if you share information and you give them part of the role in the decision-making process, I mean, one of the biggest components of the workforce is the millennials. Mm-hmm. And there definitely is a different thought process there. And there's much more of a desire to have a social impact in millennials than in any other generation that's happened before them. So I think, from that perspective, I think, nonprofits do have some level of an advantage, because they can connect with those millennials at a different level. It's not always about, as you said, the paycheck. Mm-hmm. That's important, but it's not always about the paycheck. It's the ability to make that impact, and how that impact is measured and communicated. Can you maybe talk a little bit about that?
Before you do that, can I just jump in real quick? So I was at an event put on by the Nonprofit Coordinating Committee in the city. Incredible event. And they had these folks do breakout sessions specifically about different topics, different areas of expertise. And they had one of these groups, a nonprofit out in Brooklyn, talk about how they're a rather sizable organization, and they were concerned about the lack of connection between the rank and file and the executive team, sort of that C-level or that C-hallway kind of thing. So they bring in an employee from the organization into the executive level meetings. And if they're going to vote on something, that person, that individual has input and has a vote on whatever maybe the subject matter might be for that meeting. So again, sort of leveling the playing field, if that's the right way to say it, or just getting that engagement from employees. The gentleman who's talked about that, the ED, referred to somebody from the facilities team that was sitting in a meeting and kind of was like taken aback, an older fellow, and they said, you really want me in this meeting? So that totally flips things around, because the ED said, absolutely, we value you. So that's the difference, I think. And I think in big corporate, you see that in a lot of places, although I think there's probably places it doesn't happen, but I think it's even more critical because to have the employees engaged. But sorry to cut you off on the millennial side, but if you wanted to go with that.
Yeah. So, again, I think from the millennial standpoint, it's, and the dreaded millennial, right? The millennial seems to be the hot topic, and everybody seems to be a little scared of them. And, I think that at one point or another, I guess we were all millennials at some point, although I don't think they called us that back then, but we were all that age at one point. And I think it's important that employers merge their cultures, right? So you weren't always hiring millennials. But now you may be in a position where you have a workforce where your senior managers, your senior directors are not millennials. But now all your recruiting efforts are going towards millennials because you see the value in what they bring. And so how do you marry that culture? And I think that's where, going back to one of the key parts of being an employer of choice, is team building exercises. And as Tommy mentioned, keeping them included in that process, that mindset that's married to the mission, and that they're thinking like an owner of the organization or the executive director of the organization, than an employee. And, one particular client I have in mind, I know they bring their employees, and even their junior employees, they bring them into high-level executive meetings to observe and listen in on decision-making meetings. Also bring them into board meetings, and they keep them. They also have them introduced to the board, and they see what board meetings are like. So they're including them in the whole operation of the organization. So I think that's important in marrying those two cultures.
I think it's also important, and I know this is your time, not mine, but I think it's also important when you look at maybe some of the non-program people and getting them to understand what's happening from a programmatic perspective and kind of talking about some of that programmatic stuff. Right. So that the non-program people can get as excited as the program people do, because again, the program people, as you mentioned, Tommy, they're on the front line and they're seeing what's happening and they're making a difference every day in people's lives. The non-program people, the back office people, don't always get to see this. So I think, again, if you kind of build that culture where they get to see how their job impacts what's happening. I think that's,
I think it's not always apparent, Ken, to your point. Like if I'm back office, I don't know who's they're doing the direct care or who's working in the soup kitchen. I don't necessarily get to see that. So I think organizations, the more they can include, to your point, those people in that, the better it is. I think this whole millennial word, it has that negative connotation, and I'll tell you this. I mean,
and I wasn't bringing it up.
I know you weren't.
I'm
going to say, I think it's what I think is funny about it, and I kind of usually joke about this, is depending if you read the right article, 1978 sort of started the millennials, so that kind of means I'm in there. That's the year I was born. But
you've got gray hair.
I look for no, but this is what I'm going to tell you. So I say that.
Speaking of which,
we knew this was coming.
Isn't Tommy's hair awesome?
My hair?
Yeah, your hair.
Awesome. Well, how's it look out there? Let me know. So I think it looks great. So I was thinking about, because let's just say, all right, so I'm not a millennial, but 1980, 1981, those people are 38 and 39 years old. This isn't, some kid with a skateboard anymore. This is like, these are adult people who are, I have a friend of mine who talks about it. These are people who are getting married. These are people who are having children. These are people who are getting divorced. Like these are, they're not just, kids. So I think we have to, and I think we do as a society, realize that. I think some people are still stuck on they're difficult to deal with, or they're just other people, right? But I have a friend of mine, Brad Solis, who wrote this book called Liquid Leadership, and it really focuses on not just what millennials are, but the integration of the 5, maybe 6 now generations that are in the workforce. And it's not positive or negative. I would say it probably is positive, because the differences in opinions and the difference of value systems, even more so, I think, in our type of organizations and nonprofit, because it's a lot of social service stuff. It is a lot of personality and commitment to the mission. I think it's the more an organization can appreciate that and have conversations around the different generations. My kids are going to have totally different concepts as your kids, and then Ed or me and you, with just different viewpoints and seeing the world differently. I do want to make one thing that I appreciate about this group, this generation, is the focus on social impact. The focus on when they go and look at what an organization, okay, great, you're going to give me a salary and benefits, but what are you doing for the community? What are you doing for the planet? Where is the impact you're making?
Right. Yep.
I appreciate the heck out of that. I know you see it all the time, because these are the kind of folks we hang around with. So I would just say kudos to that.
Yeah, and again, I think in certain respects, the management can learn from that sort of mentality, and how they can kind of incorporate that into how they work with some of the for-profit businesses that are donating money to them, or how they can design programs and things like that. So we talked about culture a little bit, and that's important, and I agree that that's probably one of the most important aspects of this. But if we move away from culture a second, and we kind of look at maybe since you guys are benefits people, maybe some of the benefits. What are some of the benefits that, maybe the sector is doing a good job with, and maybe some of the benefits that the sector is maybe not doing a good job with because they're just not aware?
So if we're talking about core benefits, medical insurance, products like that, well, first and foremost, medical insurance is the thing that nonprofits come to us the most for.
Well, that's the thing that
because
gives nonprofits the highest level of angst, because
exactly.
you're getting double-digit increases forced down your throat. You're getting no increases from, or government increases that are way less than what the medical benefits. So it's kind of treading water, and you don't ever seem, it's like kind of that hamster wheel.
No doubt. And I think that what we're seeing, and we see a lot of, is we'll see a nonprofit that we'll do a review for and find out that they've been with the same company for some decades, but certainly 5 to 10 years, we see a lot. And they really just have it on autopilot, thinking that there's really not much we can do. And they're kind of afraid to think out of the box and change anything, with the fear that that might, jeopardize their workforce. And I would say that from a recruiting standpoint, right, medical insurance is important, right? Because you have to have it. But I think that most applicants these days expect that they're going to get health insurance. And if you're in the nonprofit sector, it's even more expected, and it should be a rich benefit. But you could probably, so you may not be winning employees because of health insurance, but you could lose it if you're not creative with what you're doing and how you're operating, right? So
what can nonprofits do to be creative?
So I think that a few things, right? So are you looking at different strategies to bring down your costs? And are you taking that savings and moving it to other areas like intangible type of benefits that could really help you with attracting and retaining employees? So I'll give some specific examples.
I was going to say, let's explore both sides of that.
Yeah, so I'd love to. So we have a client that was a nonprofit, fairly sizable nonprofit, that was in that same scenario that we just talked about. They have been offering benefits through one particular carrier for 2 years, and then prior to that, they were with the same carrier for about 5 years. And they kind of were in the process of just, they needed to have the same type of copays every year. They didn't want to tweak copays because they didn't want to hurt the employees. And who they were working with might not have been thinking out of the box when they were presenting their solutions to them every renewal. So they kind of just were in this mindset, caught in this trap where, well, every year we're going to get an increase. So let's just get it as low as we could possibly get it. And so we try to educate nonprofits is, let's not think that way. Let's think about current costs and how we get below current costs, right? So a strategy we use with this one particular nonprofit is we found a product that had a higher deductible. And that's a scary word for anybody, more or less a nonprofit, because financially that could really strap somebody if you are hit with a disability or some kind of a hospital stay that could eat up your deductible. So what did we do? So we put in a strategy. They were facing a 35% increase, and we put in a strategy that gave them a high deductible health insurance plan only for hospital and outpatient surgery. Everything else was a copay, and we kind of mirrored the plan, catered it and customized it towards what the employees had already from non-hospital related services. And then what we did is we brought in a supplemental benefit carrier, which is typically voluntary, but in this case, the employer paid for the voluntary benefit program. And what it basically did, it was a hospital supplement program that if somebody went into the hospital, they got paid a cash reimbursement from the supplemental carrier
to make
up for the deductible. So by doing that, and the employer even went one above that, right? So they said, all right, there might be some really small gaps, and they were really strong-minded about the fact they wanted to keep these benefits exactly what they were last year. They didn't want to save money and sacrifice employees. So what we did is we created an HRA fund as almost a slush fund for the overage. So if there was ever a situation where you had an outpatient surgery and there was some overage to the actual reimbursement, they would pay that back out of the HRA.
So for those people who don't know what an HRA is, you want to?
Yeah, sorry. So an HRA is a health reimbursement arrangement. Basically what it is an employer-directed plan similar to a flex spending account, which is more employee-directed. However, this one, the employer is basically promising to reimburse employees for out-of-pocket costs related to their medical insurance and other dental as well. So they use this to make sure the employees were whole on all of that. So that was just one way we were able to do it. But the end result was now we're in year 2 with this particular client. And the first year they were facing a 35% increase, and they wound up 5% below what their costs were the year before. And what we thought about as we analyzed their business was we really didn't expect a lot of hospital claims. And when it was all said and done, I think there was 5 throughout the entire year. So we did, but by putting in the health reimbursement arrangement and having this hospital supplement plan, not only did we create a savings, we now have data. So we now have more data than they were getting from their income because they were just under 100 enrolled. So they didn't have any claims data really to speak of. Now we had data. We knew how many employees were going towards hospital stays. We knew how many outpatient surgeries there were because those people were reimbursed by the supplemental benefit plan. So in year 2, what we were able to do is we were able to negotiate because they had a higher deductible plan, their renewal came in much more favorable, and we were able to negotiate a reduction in year 2 of 4%. So now we're almost down 10% over 2 years. And at this point, what we did is we just simply advised them, well, you don't need to pay for the supplemental benefit program anymore because we know how many hospital claims you have. And we'll just use the HRA funds. We'll put that money in there because you're only using that if somebody actually has a claim. So over 2 years, I think we're close to about $500,000 in this organization that we were able to save just by a simple strategy there. So that's just one of the things. There's other out-of-the-box things that we can do.
So I mean, you hear out there, and it's kind of that alphabet soup. You have HRAs, HSAs, PEOs. You have all these different things. Nonprofits have, or any company has, all sorts of choices that they can kind of look at here and decide, how that strategy works. I mean, what do you see as the kind of the best opportunity for nonprofits? How do you steer a nonprofit from one to the other? How do you help them make those choices?
Yeah, so I would think, and I'll let Tommy weigh in this as well because I think he has some specific expertise in this area. But you mentioned PEO and professional. For those who don't know what a PEO is a professional employer organization, and still to this day, even though they've been around 30 years, there's probably about a 10 to 15% penetration rate in employers that are using PEOs. This is an opportunity that we really feel strongly about, and we have been able, it's another strategy that we've been able to implement especially for our nonprofit type clients. We find this is not always the case, but we find in a majority of cases, our nonprofits have a white collar type of connotation to their business, or some part of it anyway. We do that's not the case everywhere, but in a lot of cases it is. And through a PEO, so first of all, just to tell you about what a PEO is. A professional employer organization pools small businesses, nonprofit organizations together for the purposes of providing benefits, HR related services, compliance, payroll, things of that nature, and it's combined into one bundle service through a co-employment model. So really where the benefits come in is a nonprofit that's a smaller nonprofit, especially. So you might have a nonprofit that's 5 employees or 10 employees.
Yeah, I was going to say, how do you define smaller?
Yeah, so right now our biggest client on a nonprofit on a PEO that's a nonprofit is about 200 employees. And when you get to that mark, you start evaluating the services that you have in-house versus what a PEO can provide to you. Do you have a dedicated HR staff? Are they a seasoned HR staff? What kind of experience do they have in benefits and compliance and things of that nature? And are you still getting the value out of the PEO? But for a small nonprofit, I think our smallest nonprofit we have probably has 1 or 2 employees on a PEO. It offers a tremendous value to them because they normally don't have a director of compliance or a seasoned HR person. A lot of times it could be the executive director or one key employee that's managing all those roles. They're handling payroll, they're handling benefits, they're doing HR. So it's a way for them to combine all these things, get that extra resource. But the other real value that comes from it is because you're pooled with other organizations, there's times where if the demographics of your organization are favorable, you could have benefit rates that are far below what you would receive in the community rate market for a smaller sized employer. So it's been a really useful tool for our organization, especially with nonprofits, to help them steer towards that employer of choice model, but really get a value of the benefits.
So aside from the potential savings that it talks about, and obviously this whole outsourcing component of the PEO model, is a small organization with 5 or 10 or 25 employees gets to level the playing field from a benefits perspective, meaning the level of benefits are a Fortune 500 caliber organizations have, even if it's on the for-profit side. Now you're a small not-for-profit, and again, you're still trying to attract that talent that has other options to go to. This levels that playing field. So you could be a real tiny organization by offering very robust benefits. So that's kind of a paradigm shift, I think, that the PEO really affords the not-for-profit organizations. But when we do it, it's really, the way we look at this is we sort of help through our process. We run pretty much a diagnostic process when we meet with prospective clients. So your question was really like, what are some of the options? Or maybe I think you said it like, what is the best answer? So we don't always know, like most things, like when you meet with a prospective client, until you go through that analysis and you sort of see how they view benefits, for instance. And some organizations, although mainly not the nonprofits, but some organizations benefits are a cost center, not a value center. And it's really the feedback and the conversation we get through that diagnostic meeting where we guide them to what may be the most appropriate. And sometimes it is PEO. And when it, like I think you said this, when it works and an organization really values the service, and I mean the service in that, in my experience, I think PEO was the answer to, hey, how do I get access to inexpensive benefits, when that's not really what the PEO model is. It's a potential outcome of engaging with the PEO. However, there's a lot more that goes into it, and really it covered that from an HR and really a compliance perspective, because the PEO takes over a lot of the responsibility of being an employer off of the shoulders of the organization, which I think, in our opinion, is even more valuable in nonprofit, because they're short-staffed oftentimes, the smaller organizations, that is, and people are wearing too many hats, and HR is something that really, it's got teeth, and if you screw it up, it can come and get you. And we all know these organizations don't need penalties and fines that are,
Yeah, I think, I was gonna say, I think this goes back to that whole concept of you don't know what you don't know. And when it comes to regulations and everything else from an HR perspective, I think that's probably one of the biggest places where there's stuff that the nonprofit sector just doesn't know, because, and those are nasty things not to know, because the Department of Labor and everything else can come in and kind of hit you up with big penalties if you're not following the rules and regulations. So by having that back office, in essence, through a PEO, I think that's helpful.
Yeah. And I would just say with going back to the PEO, I think that sometimes it's not something that there's not a lot of awareness about PEO, and it's mind-boggling that after all these years, we still walk into places where they've never heard of a PEO. They don't know what it's all about. And I think that there's been a lot of confusion around it throughout the years, and partially because there's a lot of them. A lot of payroll companies will promote PEOs, their own PEOs, and it's not the easiest thing to evaluate. So going back to what we talked about before and thinking out of the box, sometimes when it's not that easy, it doesn't mean you should not explore it, right? So if it's I think sometimes nonprofits get caught up in doing things the easiest way, making administration, because they don't have those seasoned benefit teams and HR teams to evaluate this kind of stuff. And PEO can be a very complex process if it's not evaluated correctly. And so you might have one PEO that comes in and talks to you, and through their own direct sales force, and you work with them, and you go through a lengthy process of finding out if they're a financial fit for you, if they're a compliance fit for you, if they're just, your process is marriage. And you go through that process and you find out at the end that you don't qualify, or it was more money than you were expecting. It was an investment. So I think that gives it a bad name and makes it seem like it's too hard. One of the things we do is we're really proactive. I also think that that's not always the case out there from advisors, is that we're very proactive in making sure that our clients know about PEO and what it's about. It's not always a fit. There are times where it becomes an investment for an organization, and then they have to really look hard at what the soft costs they're spending right now and how they're going to benefit from the compliance and the HR and the things like that. But then there's some cases where it works out, where it's a complete home run. For instance, I have a client right now that we're taking through this process that we initiated. We could have let them just keep doing what they were doing, and we initiated because we recognized that they were they looked like an organization that would be a right fit for a PEO. And they were asking us compliance questions, which we get very involved in, but it helped us learn more about their processes. They have 10 employees. 10 employees, 9 on benefits. When it's all said and done, we're going to put them in a position where the employees have better benefits than they had before, higher level of benefits, lower copays, lower deductibles. The organization's going to have somebody that's a direct contact at the PEO. They can work with their HR team, and their costs to the organization, including the fees that they'll pay the PEO, were less than they were spending before. So when that happens, it's a win-win. And sometimes we see that probably in about 20% of the cases.
So when you're going through and you're looking at and you're making the evaluation, and a nonprofit's kind of looking at this, they can look at a PEO, but it doesn't have to be complete PEO, because you can bring some of your own benefits in if you want. So you don't have to just kind of use what they have. You can kind of take a portion of the PEO that fits well and add other features, right?
Sure. So if you need the processes, you need the HR, you need the compliance, a PEO might be a fit for you. If in the rare occasion where your benefits, in a small group we're talking, under 100 full-time equivalents, if your benefits are better than what the PEO is providing for some reason, then you can use your own benefits. You can use your own workers' comp. Not all PEOs will do that, but some of them will, and that's kind of our process, right? So we've worked with about a dozen of them. So rather than one of our clients trying to work with one PEO, going through the process, and that one doesn't work out, they have to go to another PEO, we just collect all the data, go to all the PEOs, find out, help them narrow it down to 2 or 3 that work best for them. And now they know what the financials look like. So if they see that 2 organizations offer all the same services and it's a savings to their organization, and 5 others are a huge investment, obviously we're probably going to look at the other 2, as long as they're reputable and the ones we work with are. We're gonna look at those 2 and whittle that down for them.
Yeah, and just one last point on that is, we're working with a client right now who's currently in a PEO relationship and has brought us in to help them find another PEO or another option altogether. And not each of these PEOs are going to deliver the same caliber of service or even the same level of service. It's delivered differently from organization to organization. Some are high technology driven, some are more people driven, where you're going to get somebody that'll come out on site and engage with your employees from an HR perspective. So through our analysis, even just on a conference call with this client I'm talking about yesterday, it's really got to be, what are they looking for? It goes back to what does the client need? If they said, look, we like to get the opportunity to save money on benefits and offer high-end benefits, we don't really worry about it, HR and stuff like that. I have somebody in-house who manages that process and just give us some technology and better benefits, and we're happy. So it's really going to be, again, based on those analysis type conversations to help drive them. And the alternative to that would be I'm a nonprofit and I have 3 or 4 or 5 PEO folks come to me and tell me why their solution is the one I have to go with. We're indifferent. We take that viewpoint to, we're going to find you what's most appropriate for you, whether it is this type of model or it's not that type of model. Look, I come from that world, having sold directly for PEOs and payroll companies for that matter. So it's, I don't like to beat the guys up, but it's a matter of, we have a different perspective and angle on this than a direct PEO individual.
One of the things you had mentioned before, you mentioned there's health benefits, and then you mentioned that there are, you can take the savings and put them into more soft costs or more other types of benefits. You want to talk a little bit about some of the other benefits that are out there that maybe nonprofits aren't thinking about in terms of like supplemental benefits and those types of things?
Yeah, so from a supplemental benefit standpoint, voluntary benefits have become a huge part of an employer offering these days, and voluntary benefits are on the rise. And when we say voluntary benefits, we mean non-employer paid benefits and sometimes they're employer paid and sometimes employers pay part of it, but they're very important to the process. And younger, it's interesting because studies have shown that millennials love voluntary type benefits, and the younger workforce, I should say, does gravitate towards voluntary benefits like supplemental, like the benefit we mentioned before, hospital plans or cancer, critical illness type plans. But then there's even other benefits that like Legal Shield, legal type products that offer 800 numbers to access attorneys or They'll even defend you in a parking ticket or a speeding ticket, I should say, if you get a speeding ticket. One of the things I hear in our enrollment meetings constantly is pet insurance. All right. And I can't tell you how many times we've been sitting one-on-one with an employee and they say, what about pet insurance? Do you have pet insurance? People love their pets. Rightfully so. I was a pet owner at one point in my life, and I had pet insurance.
Can I get that for my daughter?
Yeah.
Does she have a pet?
So we hear it constantly, but other than that, gym reimbursements are critical. So does your insurance company offer a gym reimbursement, or do they offer a discount to a gym reimbursement? Things like that. Telemedicine is on the rise. A lot of the insurance companies will provide this themselves. Some do not. But talking about creating a healthier culture and one that reduces costs to the organization, it's much easier to make a phone call to if you have a sore throat, to a licensed physician on the phone that can send the prescription to your pharmacy. That's a much easier process. And that is part of that millennial culture, is that ease of use, right? We're all using our iPhones and our phones, and we can pretty much do anything from a phone. In that regard, you can. There are telemedicine products where you can actually just web chat with a doctor right from your phone. They'll diagnose, take a picture of something if there's anything to show. They can give you a diagnosis. If you need an antibiotic, they'll just put it in the pharmacy. You go down the block and pick it up. So
it makes life so much easier.
Yeah. The other thing too, what I've seen a lot, and specifically in our sector in nonprofit, is folks will bring in somebody to teach yoga or do some mindfulness and some meditation and stress relief, because the direct care, especially in a lot of the organizations in the IDD and the mental health space, the direct care folks are super stressed out. I mean, I'm super stressed out, and I'm just a benefits guy, but imagine the challenges that other folks go to, sort of like I say, on those front lines, right? So to have that, either that mindfulness time or that yoga, or I have a client who has a relationship with like a massage envy, and they have massage therapists come in for their folks, and it's being, again, I think we're evolving as a species to actually care about people, and probably more so in our sector, and that's really why we decided to be so committed to the sector, because these people we like to hang out with, and they're doing great work and making an impact. But when you try and think about the people around you that work with you, they're people and they have needs, I think that's just being aware of that is changing, the culture of organization. So, the other thing you talk about is gym memberships and stuff like that. If you take that and not get so like hokey about it and just talk about it from a dollars and cents perspective, certain size clients can benefit through wellness type programs, smoking cessation. What else might there be that can literally affect
exercise and things
challenges, Fitbit challenges, things of that nature. And it's a great point. And what I was also going to say is, even if they're not a large client where they can actually gauge monetary savings from that, I think employers in general are starting to be aware of ROI for some of these type benefits, right? If you have a healthier workforce, less stressed workforce, people enjoy going to work, they're going to be more productive, right? And that, if you're a nonprofit, that could lead to more productive employees, which could lead to more funding. So I think that that's a really important part of it. They gauge ROI. But from what you were saying, Tommy, is, if you're a large enough client and you are initiating healthy initiatives in your workplace, and people are getting healthier, and that takes time, you could actually see ROI in your medical rates. Your medical rates could be driven down. Very difficult in New York to do that on a program.
But one of the things you talked about high deductible plans.
Yeah.
So if you do get people who are healthier and they're going to the doctor less, and they're have less issues with weight or diabetes or any of these other things because of healthier living, it's going to drive down the cost, which is going to result in less charges for the employee and the employer.
Absolutely. From a claim, from a perspective of allowing you to initiate more higher deductible plans and showing that the chances are that you're not going to use that kind of, or just from the pure perspective of, if you're over 100 employees at full-time equivalents, you could be experience rated. So you're actually getting rates based on the claims of your organization. Claims are high, you're going to pay more money. So that even as specific as that is, there's real ROI and real measurability there for a larger type client.
So is that something you do for the nonprofit sector? You go in and you measure the ROI or try to measure that ROI so that they can kind of utilize that information to make intelligent decisions?
So yeah, so one of the things we will do is we'll provide an analysis. Well, let's talk about a larger client. We had one just recently that we can create ROI for, and we were able to show ROI because they had very poor claims experience for this last year, right? And when we dove in and we really take a look at the claims and what was actually considered ongoing and what might have been just a one-time existent, when it was all said and done, we were able to shave off about 30 points off the renewal just by having real conversation with underwriters about, hey, this person had a bad year, right? They had a hospital stay, they had a surgery, but this is not going to be ongoing in the future. So yeah, we can have real conversations like that and create, and show them ROI.
So we talked about culture, we've talked about benefits and everything else. How does a nonprofit take all of this information, going back to that employer of choice? I mean, how do I use that to attract and retain staff? Because we know that the competition is fierce. We know that the ability to attract and keep staff is important. We know that the cost of losing a staff member is very high. How do we utilize all this information to now get to a point where we can kind of harness what we know and kind of the information that you guys bring to the table to make sure that our staff stays and that we can, again, be that employer of choice and bring new staff on?
Yeah, so I think that becoming that employer of choice is first and foremost recognition. You have to take the corporate culture, the temperature of the corporate culture, and see where you're at right now and where do you need to tweak, for lack of a better word, and improve going forward. And once you have that data, then you can start to gauge the satisfaction of your employees, what's working, what's not working, and then you can use that in your recruiting tactics and go after the types of employees that are married to your mission more. But it's more of that, again, goes back to that whole culture issue. If your culture is good and now you've got that and you've created that employer of choice model, you want to advertise that. You want to be talking about that. And I would say that from a recruiting standpoint, the best way that we're seeing recruiting is from within. Mm-hmm. I think that you would agree, Ken, that probably the best compliment you could ever get is a referral from one of your clients, right? Mm-hmm. So that's always been the way we felt. And you can really do effective recruiting if you're doing a good job for your current staff and they're making recommendations to other employees that say, hey, this is a pretty great place to work. You should check it out. I think we have one client that does real measurability on this, and they know they produce reports every year, and they exactly know where their recruiting is coming from and where they're having most success. And when they looked at it, 45% was coming from internal employees, and another 38% was coming from the internet, which is a huge part of recruiting.
Which kind of brings up the next question. Because now I've got this whole aspect of social media, and I'm getting out there. How does a nonprofit utilize or tell their story, within their social media, whether it be their website or whatever, to let potential employees know that they are this employer of choice and that this really is a good place to work?
I mean, off the top of my head, I think testimonials are a great way to do that. Talking about engaged employees, have your employees that are satisfied, talk about it, create videos that you can produce on Facebook, on social media that's showing that, how satisfied they are to work for this organization. I think that'll do a great job of promoting your message and showing just exactly how you treat your employees. I think surveying your employees is to find that out, to find out which ones are real satisfied and is an important part of that. So checking with your employees. Are you happy? If you are happy, what on a scale of 1 to 10, how happy are you? And would you refer somebody to work for this organization? And I think those two simple questions could give you a lot of feedback that can help your recruiting process.
Yeah, I think also if you do, when someone leaves, you do an exit interview,
right,
and gather the information through that exit interview to find out why that person has left. And I mean, unfortunately, you'd rather learn while the people are still there and not when they leave. But obviously, if you can pull that information.
Yeah, so the thing that we hear about that though is exit interviews are kind of flawed, right? Because a lot of people will leave and never give you the opportunity to get an exit interview. And when you get an exit interview, how truthful are they being? So you're right, but I don't know how forthcoming people are with that info.
So I brought this topic up a little earlier when, again, through the nonprofit coordinating committee, I was at an event, and one of the breakouts was it was from an HR perspective, and it was about that employee engagement process, sort of like almost the life cycle, that first 90 days of the employee's relationship with the organization. And yes, exit interviews can be flawed. What about interviews on a regular basis? What about that type of engagement and corporate, they used to call it, like, taking your temperature, those kind of conversations.
360 views.
Yeah, right. I used to hate the taking your temperature because I'm a salesman, and taking temperature basically meant, you didn't bring in enough business. Like, what are we talking about here? They didn't want to know if I was engaged. They wanted to know why I didn't sell enough. But I think in different roles and responsibilities, it's where are you at? And it goes back to what I said earlier. It's, what do you want out of the organization? What does employee number 12 want out of the organization? Not what do I want out of employee number 12? So having that open dialogue, man, that open door policy is it's crucial. It really is.
One of the things you mentioned, Ed, before is you mentioned trying to get your staff to have an ownership mentality or an executive director mentality. And I think every organization, you have, your visitors, your renters, and your owners. How do you kind of work people through that cycle and change attitudes so that if you have, visitors, how quickly do you need to identify that they're visitors and get them out of the business out of the organization because they can be caustic to the organization? How do you kind of get your, renters to kind of have that ownership mentality?
Yeah, so I was talking to an employee at a nonprofit the other day. It was an executive type position, and they were telling me how they do their recruiting, and they work with a staffing firm. And their staffing firm, they are very specific in their message and how they want to recruit. They're looking for college applicants that are just out of school, and they go through a process of recruiting. They put them through a 90-day process where they're still working for the staffing company, and then after 90 days they make that decision. So it doesn't cost the organization as much as it might.
It's almost like a temp to perm type.
Yeah, like a temp to perm type of situation. I think that creates an opportunity when we're talking about outsourcing and things like that for nonprofits that gives you that ability to take a look at this employee to see if they really are an owner mentality going forward. So that's one way, I think, an easy way to get through that initial stage. After that, I think it goes back to something we talked about before, which is starting to treat those type of employees as owners and keeping your mission and your corporate mission in their face, for lack of a better word, all the time. Have them understand what this organization's like. I think a lot of times you're talking, we do a lot of one-on-one employee interviews over benefits during open enrollment period. But it's funny because sometimes I feel like a bartender when we're doing this, because we hear a lot more than just what my health insurance choice is going to be for this year. So in those, we hear a lot about how involved they're you can tell right away how engaged they are in the process, how, if they're staying. I mean, they'll tell us if they're leaving next week, and, information we really don't want to know, right?
I don't need benefits, so I'm not going to be here.
Yeah, right. So I think engaging them in the process from the very beginning, getting them to make sure, and what I was going to say is a lot of them don't know what the mission of the organization is. So especially when they're new, if you start to really ask them what it's all about, they really don't know how to recite that. So having them understand the mission, I think, is extremely important. And then going back to some of the things we talked about before, like we have clients that bring their employees into board meetings at certain points. I'm sure that's not appropriate from the beginning, but transitioning them into being involved in high-level type meetings with C-level executives, things like that, where they can get an experience of what the organization is all about, and also make sure they're educated, make sure they understand the financials of the organization and that the organization is sound, how they get their funding dollars and things of that nature, which I think is critical. And then they'll start to think of more about the organization first. I think that happens a lot more in nonprofit than it does in for-profit. I think you will find in nonprofit, at least we run into a lot of people that, they're not there for the money. They're there because they like the mission. They want to be part of that mission. And so I think there's an opportunity for organizations to capitalize on that. And so I think that's a benefit that nonprofits have.
I would just think, from the perspective of personal development and staff development and things like that, there's so many tools out there, from the old school stuff, the Myers-Briggs and the DISC and things like that, because you're not going to hire 50 people and go 50 for 50. It just doesn't work that way. But the more you can sort of mitigate that risk and understand maybe where somebody's coming from initially and what, who they are personality wise. I was just at a board retreat this weekend and it was very interesting. They brought in an outside consultant in. It's an international organization, rather large. And we all, to go to the retreat, had to do an assessment, a personality sort of trait assessment, one of these deals. And then they took and they put on the board all of the different folks that were going up on the whiteboard, all the board members, and kind of showed where they were real strong and then where they were real weak. And I think inside of a business organization, a not-for-profit, it's the same type of thing. Because I might think that I am this and this is what I want to do, but I either may not have the right skill set or I don't even have the right interest level to do these types of things. So it would be that to find out who is going to stick around and who doesn't really want to be here to begin with. So I think you have to have those type of assessments.
And I think that comes back to the soft skills you were talking about before. As part of that culture is, work into that culture some of the soft skills and do training on some of the soft skills so that, you're teaching them how to be more, management type people and how to be more effective and how to, control their time better and everything else.
And the career path thing too that goes with that. Exactly. I mean, it's like, you've come from big organizations and you can see where you're going. And if I'm inside of, whether it be a large or small organization, I don't know where I could be in 5 years or 2 years and nobody's had that conversation with me. How empowered am I going to be? Yeah, I'm sold out to the mission, but I also got to think of where am I going? I
just spoke to someone the other day. I was doing an interview for one of my clients, and the person was looking to leave where they're working at because they said they're looking around and they're seeing that their managers are the same age as they are. And
where do I go? Right? Where's my spot?
The path up?
Right.
And the opportunity at this client of ours is that they're stepping into an opportunity where there is a growth pattern and there is, and maybe there is growth within that first organization, maybe in a different department.
Right.
But if that communication isn't happening and people don't see that, again, I think
that goes through that probably through these assessments and conversation. I think the word that keeps popping in my mind is communication. And it's like you say, that individual who's going to leave and go somewhere else may not be aware that 6 cubicles down is a totally different department that they can really flourish and not only flourish personally, but add value to the organization and be more of an asset to the organization. So we see a lot of groups that are promoting from within, right? And trying to find people and the word we used to use, like grooming people, right? To get to that certain level. But again, that's a cultural thing. That comes, this, you deal with enough EDs and CEOs, it comes from the top down, and that's who drives these organizations is that leadership. And if you're concerned about that and you're concerned about growing your people, then this is a focus area for you. If not, it's something different.
Okay, from a benefits perspective and from a HR and kind of the whole world you live in, what do you see as maybe some of the bigger risks that the nonprofit sector is facing today?
So from the world we live in, what's communicated to us is how do we offer benefits and stay within a budget that might be very difficult to do. But just as important as that is compliance. Going back to what we talked about before, most organizations that we run into, especially the smaller ones, do not have dedicated people handling compliance. And with things like the Affordable Care Act, the new harassment laws, the Me Too movement, just the other day, we had a client we sent out a compliance blast that we normally send out. And every time we send out a compliance blast, we get a million questions like, does this apply to me? Like most organizations, for-profit or nonprofit, don't have a clue as to what they really need to comply, especially if they're on a smaller level. So education is critical to those types of organizations, but how do you get that organization?
Education, yeah.
Yeah. How do you get that education? You know, if you're in a small nonprofit and you are in charge of development, you're in charge of HR, you're basically a one person operation or one key person. You know, how do you spend time getting the education that you need in order to keep up with all these laws? It's daunting. It's difficult for professionals to keep up with this, that do these kind of things all day long. But I would say in that regard, you should not be concerned or scared to outsource. I think there's a lot of opportunities out there to outsource these type of services to HR professionals or employment attorneys, or even working with your current brokers or advisors, your CPA, to get this type of information. I think what happens sometimes is nonprofits, because of budgetary constraints, get concerned about outsourcing these things. But going back to what you said before, what you don't know what you don't know. What you don't know can cost you, right? So if you're not letting professionals handle this, it might cost you more in the long run than it does now.
By the way, this is the direction that most businesses are going in. Most businesses are going lean, you know, and that's kind of the new direction that business is moving in, and it's a direction that the nonprofit should be looking to embrace also.
Do you feel that they're not embracing it as quickly as other organizations?
Yeah, again, I think the nonprofits, a lot of nonprofits tend to be maybe one step behind. Mm-hmm. Because of lack of resources and the dedication of or the requirement to, especially if they're government funded, to dedicate a lot of the resources to direct programming as opposed to building infrastructure and things like that, which is a little bit difficult.
And I think, like, back to the outsourcing, and we spoke about PEO, but Ed talks about the other specialists and professionals and consultants that are out there that you can really lean on. I'm always of the personal mindset that if it's not my wheelhouse, I don't really want to deal with it. I want to get people who specialize in that. Let the specialists do that, you know? So I think that's important. But to go a little further in what you were saying, you screw this stuff up, it's going to cost you, right? And you and I, we have these conversations all the time about the challenge, and we've said it today about funding, how, you know, government funding is going away, and it's a perceived challenge to raise money. I don't want to just make a blanket statement and say it's only difficult to raise money, but it's perceived to be challenging. In that sense, if I'm spending money on penalties and fines that I could have dealt with in a different way by, you know, penny wise, pound foolish, right? If I had done that up front, I don't have to go raise those dollars, because the board's going to hate to hear that we got to go now. Some of the fundraising we're doing is to pay these penalties because we weren't aware of something. So I say, at least from our perspective as a firm, we're always out there to let our folks know where the gaps and risk might be. So that's important for us.
Cool. Yeah. Cool. So we're basically out of time.
Oh, really?
That was an hour?
That was an hour. Yeah.
That was
wow.
So first of all, I want to thank you for being part of the today's Cerini Nonprofit Connection. So thank you.
Well, thanks for having me. Congratulations, because this is awesome.
Yeah. So our next connection is March 14th. We'll be discussing board engagement, measuring impact, and best practices with Christine Deska of Nonprofit Sector Strategies. If you missed our past connections, or you want to watch this one again with a loved one today on Valentine's Day, they're available on our website, YouTube, and Facebook. So, you know, join us again March 14th for our next connection. Thank you, everybody, for participating today.
Thanks, Ken.